We see tragedy everywhere in our lives. We watch as people we know succumb to death. We see it on the news, and it's a rather unfortunate part of the human experience. In the early 2000s, American filmmaker Gus Van Sant decided to tackle the heavy topic of death in 3 films. Those films are Gerry, Elephant, and Last Days. These films are now referred to as the Death Trilogy. Each movie takes on a very different aspect of death. All 3 are inspired by real events, and there's this very unique filming style that we see progress throughout. So today I'm going to be analyzing these 3 films and discuss the impacts of the subject matter both on myself and on other viewers at the time. So Van Sant started this project with a very specific inspiration in mind for the style of filmmaking that he wanted to take up, and he was very much inspired by Béla Tarr, who was known for his use of long shots and the depictions of mundane people going about their lives. This style is not one that we really see a lot nowadays in modern media, and it adds a very different level of depth to his films that I truly believe would not be as well received without. Van Sant specifically mentions Tarr's film, Santa Tango. The film features these long shots and its depictions of the effects of communism on a very small town in Hungary. The film's runtime is an astounding 7.5 hours. It focuses on the daily lives of these citizens, and it's highly praised with a rating of 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. We see evidence of this inspiration throughout Van Sant's 3 films, but it is very present in Gerry, with long shots that run up to 10 minutes in length and the stunning display of the desert being showcased throughout. Van Sant builds an atmosphere with the length and position of filming, portraying the exact emotion he wanted you to feel from the characters and their plights. I believe that this specific style of film offers something unique and vulnerable. It takes away the notion that everything is scripted, and it forces you into feeling the mundane emotions with the characters that you're following. While this type of filming is admittedly not for everybody, it's worth the effort in the end, as it creates a beautiful representation of the tragedy unfolding around you. Gerry, as previously stated, is the first installment in the Death Trilogy. It's based on the death of David Coughlin. On August 4th, 1999, Rafi Kodakian and David Coughlin stopped at Rattlesnake Canyon to go hiking and camping. The 2 men became lost in the desert plains and started to wander the desert, looking for a road so they might find help. The 2 were equipped with a topographical map, but neither could read it. On August 8th, Rafi was discovered alone. He was spotted by a ranger that had been sent out to search for the 2 missing men. When Kodakian was found by the ranger, he admitted to killing Coughlin, stating, "I killed and buried my best friend today. Dave had been in pain all night. At around 5 or 6, he turned to me and begged that I put my knife through his chest. I did. And a second time when he wouldn't die." Despite this story, Kodakian was later charged with second-degree murder. Gerry, starring Casey Affleck and Matt Damon, depicts a very similar version of the story. The 2 men, who both go by Gerry, wander into the desert on a hike and quickly become turned around in the barren wasteland. We watch Affleck and Damon wander the desert, quickly losing hope of making their way out. This film is a very intriguing concept to me. It caught my attention immediately due to the lack of dialogue. In the place of dialogue, our narrative is written by the sprawling shots of the desert landscape and the degradation of our characters' physical forms until the final tragedy. Gerry was unique for me. I'd never seen a concept portrayed in that way, and I think it speaks heavily to the influence from Tarr. Our desert wasteland is built up by music and long shots of the 2 men wandering until they finally collapse. The focus on background music builds our emotions. We can see at the beginning of the film there is hope to make it out, even when they rest for the night. By our second day, the music becomes more ominous. This raises the tension in the air. It creates the threat that we see present for a great deal of the film. The 2 men are climbing mountains, trying to get a grasp on their location or the direction they need to head in. We hear the desperation in the background as they search for water. The moment that sets the tone for the trilogy is the death of Affleck's character. Van Sant does not focus on the fight, as the character is suffocated by his friend, instead choosing to focus on the exhaustion from both men in the moments leading up to his death. This sets the tone for how Van Sant is approaching tragedy, and we will continue to expand on the concept of glamorizing violence in the next installment. The second film we are presented with in this trilogy is Elephant, which draws its inspiration from the massacre that happened at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. On April 20th, 1999, two students named Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold entered Columbine High School and began opening fire. After the situation dispersed, there were a total of 15 people pronounced deceased, including Eric and Dylan, with an additional 24 people wounded. This tragedy shocked the nation. It stayed in the news for months, and it's still referenced both in popular media and in national gun law debates. This is a topic that I and others are well acquainted with due to the implementation of active shooter drills, or ALICE, in the 2000s, and the presence of other shootings frequently in the media today. Again, I've said this before in comment sections and whatnot, but I want to make it clear right here on this channel. This channel is apolitical. I'm never going to make videos where I'm like, hey, this is what you should think. We're not about that, okay? We make film critiques here and there, and we make video essays, but for the most part, I try not to get too political. If you want to go and hear that from other people, go for it. I'm not here to appeal to one side of the aisle or another. What I am going to talk about, though, is just how crazy it is growing up in America at this specific point in time, because we used to do so many drills preparing for something as horrific as this, even when we were as young as like 6 years old. Living in a culture like that, it very much gets you to prep for the worst at all times, bordering on paranoia at points. And I think in this film, you sort of get that feeling of knowing something bad is going to happen, and something bad actually does happen. In the film Elephant, we follow several teenagers throughout their day at a regular high school, hours before a massacre takes place. We're immediately confronted with the name of the character we're following at the moment and get an insight into their day. We follow several different students, usually crossing paths with previous characters, and getting a direct look at each person's life and problems. We are shown throughout the film that each character we meet has their unique flaws and strengths. For example, the first character that we are introduced to is named John. John is a young man who seems relatively social, yet has to manage his drunk father at home. We gain a deeper look into multiple characters, which is unusual for popular films that tend to focus on just a small group of characters. And with this style, we can form a deeper connection with these characters, which will later be stripped away from us. The way that the film is shot familiarizes us with our location and depicts a bustling high school. We follow our characters with the long shots we become accustomed to in Gerry, but these long shots don't necessarily focus on our main character the whole time, as we are wound through the teacher's lounge and back to our character, showing us more of the community in this school, but also the geography of it. This was not unintentional, as later we are shown the school during the massacre, and it is eerily devoid of people. Elephant was a film that I deeply connected with due to the fears my generation grew up surrounded by, which is in large part why it was so controversial. This film received very mixed reviews due to the nature of the content and the fact that it was released in May of 2002, which was relatively shortly after the tragedy took place. I think the way that Van Sant depicted this film was tasteful. The violence and gore itself was minimized, focusing instead on the victims as human beings and not targets. I find that even in films that have anti-violent messages, we still end up inadvertently glorifying the bloodshed and terror, and that turns the film into something other than what it was meant to be. Van Sant generally avoids this issue very well in all of these films, but there is a weak point that I found. While we humanize the victims, in the same breath we humanize the perpetrators as well. The last two characters that we follow in this film are the shooters, and I don't agree with that perspective. While the focus is on the fact that every character has flaws and problems, in a way, we take away from that by trying to paint the shooters as being the same as the other teenagers. Yes, we see that they were bullied. However, it paints the picture that their actions were just because they were flawed individuals and not a deeper psychological issue. Despite that qualm, though, Van Sant ends the film in a way that forces the viewer to think about what it meant. He's not pushing an agenda for or against gun laws or for and against mental health resources. Instead, you're left to just sit with the meaning of the film and draw your own conclusion. We end at the final installment of the Death Trilogy, Last Days. This film was loosely based on the death of Kurt Cobain in April of 1994.
Hi, I'm Kurt Loder with an MTV News special report on a very sad day. Kurt Cobain, the leader of one of rock's most gifted and promising bands, Nirvana, is dead, and this is the story as we know it so far.
According to Van Sant, he actually wanted to make a biography of Cobain for about 10 years, but was on the fence about it due to concerns about a lawsuit from Courtney Love, who was Cobain's wife. And he was also concerned that Love and Cobain's family and fans would be upset due to the nature of the film. He even spoke with Courtney Love on the subject. In Last Days, we follow a grunge musician named Blake in the leading days up to his death. We see Blake continuously avoiding interactions with others, and in the style of Bellatar, it focuses on the mundane aspects of his life. We noticeably don't see Blake performing on stage. We don't see all of the fans, and the paparazzi, and we don't see these big musical numbers like you would in a film like Bohemian Rhapsody. Instead, we're shown his manager pressuring him to show up to concerts. We see him making cereal. We see him watching TV. And this is not to be assumed as boring. These actions have meaning. The actions we see are indicative of a man who's losing his sense of self. He's grounding himself in normal things. In a crucial scene, we see him playing guitar after his friends have left the rehearsal room. The scene is crucial because we see most of his pain coming out when he's singing. The way his voice fluctuates, it's almost like he's crying with nobody to hear him. Just as we see him run from others in the earlier portions of the film, we see him unable to run from himself here. One of his guitar strings breaks while he's playing, and he continues to pluck at it while playing. And I feel like this is a perfect illustration of our main character's mental state. He's pulling on broken strings in himself that he feels unable to fix. It's hard to describe the kind of sadness and hollowness that can produce the kind of song we see here. We get an insight into ideas not fully formed but present in the front of our minds. We wait in anticipation for a thought, an idea, something, but we're left wanting answers, just like Blake was. It's easier to avoid other people than yourself, and in these moments where the emotion is raw but the thoughts are half-formed, it's easy to assume that the thought was stopped midway through, a way to avoid himself as much as possible. The film ends shortly after with Blake ending his own life. When his body has been found, we're presented with the image of him climbing up to heaven on a metaphorical ladder, naked and free. The movie was also met with some criticism upon release, which I believe presents how the movie is laid out. We are forced into the perspective of a fly on the wall for this story, but it evoked a need to interfere. It was almost a helpless feeling, like watching Blake become unraveled on screen while we sat idly by. I found myself wanting to reach out to him during the film, knowing where it was going to end. The filming style made us feel distant, apart from Blake, as he separated himself from everyone around him. Van Sant doesn't glorify the life of an American rock star. He condemned the idolization of celebrities to the point of alienation. I feel this film focused on the pressures that were placed on him and how that potentially hindered his ability to recover from stress and isolation. It's easy for me to see why people may not like this film or its style due to the nuanced approach it took towards isolation, rather than just focusing on the celebrity lifestyle that we've come to expect out of films of that nature. I just think that if you look past your expectations, it becomes a beautiful film. It's not a Kurt Cobain biopic. It isn't Bohemian Rhapsody. It's its own thing, and there's nothing else like it. Gus Van Sant's work on these three films does not fit into the box of modern cinema. Despite my admiration, it wouldn't fit with the tastes of a lot of people due to the slow burn nature. Unfortunately, this leads to some people who don't enjoy his work casting down on the people who don't appreciate it. I personally don't believe that we should be taking that approach to media. Everyone has their own tastes and needs to be respected. I can say that this has changed my perspective on the media that I consumed. It's really opened up my eyes to a different style of creation that I can apply in my own work and feedback that I can give to others. If you've never heard of Gus Van Sant, or maybe you've only seen Good Will Hunting or Milk, I encourage you to look into his work and develop your own opinion. It may not be for you. I get it. You don't have to like these movies. I'm not saying that this video is like the objective truth. It's just my own personal experience with these movies. But even if you may not like it, it also may open you up to a different way of consuming media that you would have never expected.